The air inside U-957 had long ago ceased to be air in any meaningful sense. It was something else now, a thick, oily soup of diesel fumes, unwashed bodies, rotting food, and the metallic tang of fear that 18 men produced when sealed inside a steel coffin beneath the Atlantic. I was 19 years old. My name is Klaus Hartmann, and I want you to understand something before this story goes any further. I was not a monster. None of us were. Not at first. We were boys playing at being warriors, believers in a cause that seemed righteous when viewed from the sunny streets of Hamburg, where flags snapped in the wind and crowds cheered our departure. That was April 1945, a lifetime ago, 3 weeks ago. Now, in early May, crouched in the cramped radio compartment with headphones pressed against my ears, I listened to the static hiss that had replaced our connection to high command. Beyond that, static lay a truth none of us wanted to acknowledge. Germany was dying. Perhaps already dead. Hartmann, Kapitänleutnant, Werner Beck's voice cut through my thoughts. Our commander stood in the narrow passageway, his face gaunt in the red emergency lighting we'd been using to conserve battery power. At 32, he looked 60. Any response from headquarters? Nothing, Herr Kaliu. Just static. His jaw tightened. We both knew what the silence meant. For 3 days now, no orders, no acknowledgement, no rescue coordinates. The U-boat command in Wilhelmshaven had either been captured or destroyed. We were alone. Keep trying, he said. But his eyes betrayed him. He didn't expect an answer. I watched him move forward through the boat, stooping beneath pipes and cables, past men who sat or lay in whatever spaces they could find. Chief Engineer Muller, 52 years old and the oldest among us, was teaching young Hans Becker, just 17, how to splice a frayed electrical cable. They worked by the light of a single bulb, their fingers stained black with grease and battery acid. In the forward torpedo room, 6 men slept in shifts between the remaining torpedoes. We'd fired 5 in our last engagement with a convoy off the Irish coast. 1 hit, we thought, though in truth we'd submerged too quickly to confirm it. That was before we knew about the new destroyers with their long-range sonar and depth charges that could crack our hull like an eggshell at depths we once thought safe. The boat creaked and groaned. At 120 meters, every rivet was a prayer. Klaus. The voice beside me belonged to Friedrich Otten, my friend from training. We'd joined the Kriegsmarine together, 2 boys from the same Hamburg neighborhood who thought submarines were glamorous. What's it like up there now? Do you think the city still stands? I thought of my mother's letters, the last one arriving in January. She wrote about rations growing smaller, about the bombing, about neighbors disappearing. She never said where they went, but I knew. Everyone knew. I'm sure it's fine. I lied. Friedrich smiled. He knew I was lying. We all knew everything now, here at the end. The lies had become too thin to hide behind. A metallic ping echoed through the hull. Then another. Every man in the boat froze. Sonar. Active sonar. Hunting us. Beck's voice came calm and level. The voice of a man who'd made peace with death. Silent running. All hands to stations. I killed the radio set, plunging my station into darkness. Around me, the boat transformed into a held breath. Men stopped moving. The ventilation fans spun down to silence. Even our heartbeats felt too loud. The pinging continued. Closer now. The hunter was circling. In the darkness, I could hear Friedrich's breathing beside me, rapid and shallow. I reached out and found his hand, gripped it. He gripped back, hard enough to hurt. The destroyer passed overhead like the footsteps of God. For 20 minutes, we drifted in absolute silence, while death prowled the surface. I counted my heartbeats. 1,247 before the sonar finally faded into the distance. Beck waited another hour before ordering us to life support speed. The ventilation fans stirred the fetid air. Men released breaths they'd been holding. Someone laughed. That high, brittle sound of survival. But later, after the watch change, I found Beck in the commander's closet, barely a bunk, with a curtain for privacy. He was staring at a photograph of a woman and 2 children, tears streaming down his face in the red light. He didn't acknowledge me. I didn't acknowledge his tears. We'd all learned that some privacies must be respected, even in this sardine can where 18 men shared 67 meters of steel tube. I returned to my station and put the headphones back on. Static. Always static. I imagined I could hear voices in that white noise, orders from a command structure that no longer existed, news of a war already lost, the screams of the drowning men from ships we'd sunk. How many had we killed? Did it matter anymore? At 0200 hours, Beck called all officers to the control room, such as it was, barely larger than a telephone booth, crammed with valves and gauges and the periscope housing. I was there as communications officer, along with the first watch officer and chief engineer. Beck unfolded a chart with trembling hands. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "I must tell you something. 3 days ago, before we lost contact, I received unofficial information. The Führer is dead. Berlin has fallen. Dönitz has assumed command and is negotiating surrender." The words hung in the recycled air like smoke. "That's impossible," the first watch officer whispered. We were told many things," Beck interrupted. "Most of them lies." He looked at each of us in turn. "The question now is simple. What do we do? We have fuel enough to reach Norway. Perhaps Argentina if we're lucky. We have 5 torpedoes. We have 18 men who believed in something that no longer exists." "Orders are orders," Muller said, but even he didn't sound convinced. "Whose orders?" Beck asked. "From whom? For what purpose?" He refolded the chart, his hands steadier now. "I'm going to put this to the crew. Tomorrow, when they've rested, when their minds are clearer than they are tonight, we'll vote. Democracy." He laughed bitterly. At the bottom of the Atlantic, the Führer would be proud. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the narrow bunk I shared with 2 other men, listening to the sounds of U-957 as she crept through the dark water. Every creak, every groan, every mechanical heartbeat of this steel beast that had become our entire world. Friedrich found me at 0400 during the dog watch, when men were at their lowest ebb. "Klaus," he whispered, "do you ever think about the ones we killed?" I didn't answer immediately. In the darkness, I could see them, the merchant sailors, arms flailing as they were pulled under by the suction of their sinking ships. We'd watched through the periscope after our first kill. Beck had made us watch, said we needed to understand what we were doing. Every day, I finally answered, "Do you think they'll forgive us when this is over?" "Friedrich," I said, gripping his shoulder, "I don't think we'll ever be forgiven. Not by them. Not by history. Maybe not by God. Then why are we still down here?" It was the question that haunted all of us. Why were we still here, in this iron coffin, following orders that might no longer exist for a cause already dead? I had no answer. None of us did. Above us, the Atlantic rolled on, indifferent to our struggles, to our doubts, to the tiny bubble of air and desperation creeping through its depths. Somewhere up there, the sun was rising on a world we no longer belonged to. In 12 hours, Beck would call the crew together. In 12 hours, we would face the question that every soldier must eventually answer. Is it worth dying for a lost cause? But that was 12 hours away. For now, we simply endured. That's what submariners do. We endure. The hull creaked. The ocean pressed in. And U-957 sailed on into the abyss. Morning came without dawn. Down here, time was measured only by the watch schedule and the slowly dying batteries that powered our lights. The crew assembled in the forward torpedo room, the only space large enough to hold us all at once, though large was a cruel joke. We squeezed between the remaining torpedoes, men sitting on bunks, on the deck, anywhere they could fit. 18 faces in the red emergency lighting. 18 ghosts. Beck stood before us, his uniform torn at the shoulder, a week's worth of beard on his hollow cheeks. Behind him, the torpedoes gleamed dully, 5 deadly fish that represented our last bargaining power with fate. "You know why I've called you here," he began, his voice steady despite everything. "Our situation is no longer sustainable. We have enough fuel for perhaps 10 more days at cruising speed. Food for 12 if we cut rations further. Battery power is critical. And we have received no orders for 72 hours. "What about the secret transmission?" asked Bootsman Weber, our senior petty officer. He was 38, a veteran of 37 patrols. His hands never stopped shaking anymore. "The emergency frequencies?" "Static," I confirmed. "Every frequency. Either the transmitters are destroyed, or no one's left to man them," Friedrich finished. A murmur rippled through the crew. Fear smelled different than sweat or diesel. More acidic. More alive. Beck raised his hand for silence. "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interruption. 3 days ago, I received an encoded message from U-853 before they went silent. The message contained information from a source in Wilhelmshaven." He paused, and I could see him gathering courage for the words that would change everything. "The Führer is dead. He took his own life in Berlin on April 30th. Soviet forces have taken the city. Admiral Donitz has assumed command and is negotiating unconditional surrender with the Allies." Silence. The kind of silence that screams. Then, young Hans Becker vomited, the sound obscenely loud in the confined space. No one moved to help him. We were all too stunned. "You're lying," Oberstormman Richter said. The old quartermaster had been at sea since 1939. He had a wife in Bremen, or had no one knew what remained of Bremen now. The Führer would never abandon his people. Beck's laugh was bitter. "Open your eyes, Richter." He did. We all did. Every time we followed an order that made no sense. Every time we sank a ship full of civilians. Every time we told ourselves it was for the greater good. "That's treason." Richter was on his feet now, his face purple in the red light. "You're talking treason, Herr Kaleo." "Treason against what?" Beck shouted back, and I'd never heard him raise his voice before. "Against a dead man? Against a Reich that no longer exists? Against a flag that's probably burning in a dozen Allied capitals right now?" The boat tilted suddenly, Muller adjusting our depth, and men grabbed for handholds. The moment of violence passed, but the tension remained, thick as the stale air. Beck composed himself. "I am giving you a choice. We can surface and surrender to the nearest Allied ship. We can attempt to reach a neutral port, Argentina, perhaps, though the journey would be desperate. Or we can continue our patrol, follow our last standing orders, and hunt until our fuel runs out or we're destroyed." He looked at each man in turn. "I'm putting it to a vote. Democratic. Perhaps for the first and last time in this Navy." The Führer Richter began. "The Führer is dead," Beck roared. "And soon we will be too. Unless we make a choice. Not as Germans. Not as National Socialists. But as men who want to see their families again. If they're still alive to see." That last sentence was a dagger. How many of us had families in cities that had been bombed into rubble? Hamburg, Berlin, Dresden, the list went on. "I have a question," said Lieutenant Fischer, our torpedo officer. He was 24, from Munich, and had the dead eyes of a man who'd seen too much. "If we surrender, what happens to us? War crimes, trials, hanging?" Beck met his gaze. "I don't know. Possibly, probably, for some of us. We've sunk 43 ships on this patrol cycle. How many men died in those sinkings? Hundreds? Thousands?" His voice cracked. "I have blood on my hands. We all do. Surrender doesn't wash that away. But at least we'd be alive to face judgment." "Better to die with honor," Richter muttered. Honor, Friedrich spoke up, surprising everyone. The youngest of us rarely spoke in crew meetings. What honor is there in dying for a lie? That's not honor, that's waste. The boy speaks sense, Muller said. The chief engineer's endorsement carried weight. I'm 52 years old. I've been in the Kriegsmarine for 34 years. I've seen 3 wars and dozens of battles. And I can tell you this, there is no honor in a meaningless death. Honor is in living, in rebuilding what we've destroyed, in facing what we've done. So we run? Richter spat. We tuck our tails and surrender like cowards? We survive, Beck corrected. We survive so that when they ask us how this happened, how Germany fell so far, we can tell them. We can bear witness. Someone has to. He produced a small canvas bag. Anonymous vote. Tear a piece of paper from your notebook. Write S for surrender, N for neutral port, or F for fight. Fold it and place it in the bag. Whatever wins, we do. No questions, no recriminations. We're a crew, and we stay a crew. The voting took 20 minutes. Men wrote their letters in private corners. Faces turned away. Some wrote quickly, decisively. Others stared at their paper for long minutes before committing. I wrote S without hesitation. I wanted to live. God help me. I wanted to live. When the bag came back to Beck, his hand shook as he opened it. He counted in silence, making small piles of paper on the torpedo. The only sound was breathing and the eternal creaking of the hull. Finally, he looked up. Surrender. 9. Neutral port. 4. Fight. 5. A pause. Then Richter screamed, "No! Recount! Someone change their vote!" "The vote stands," Beck said firmly. But Richter wasn't finished. He lurched forward, and I saw the flash of steel, a knife pulled from somewhere. "Traitor! I'll kill you myself before I let you surrender this boat!" Everything happened at once. Muller grabbed Richter from behind. Weber tackled him low. The knife went skittering across the deck, and Fisher dove for it. Men were shouting, pushing, the space too small for the violence erupting within it. Then a gunshot, deafening in the metal tube. Everyone froze. Beck stood with his Luger pointed at the ceiling, a hole now punched through a cluster of pipes. Water began dripping from the puncture, a slow, steady leak. "That's enough," Beck said quietly. The gun remained raised. "Richter, you will return to your station. Weber, escort him. If he resists, put him in chains. We don't have a brig, but we have handcuffs, and by God, I will use them." Richter was crying now, great heaving sobs. "We swore an oath. We swore." "I know," Beck said, and his voice was gentle now, almost kind. "I know what we swore. But sometimes survival requires breaking oaths. Sometimes living is harder than dying." They took Richter away. The water continued dripping from the pipe, each drop a tiny clock counting down our time. Beck holstered his gun. "Muller, how bad is that leak?" The chief engineer examined it, his face grim. "Manageable if we surface soon. Critical if we stay under for more than 6 hours. The pressure at depth will widen it. Then we surface at nightfall," Beck decided. "We'll run on the surface, make for the British coast. With luck, we'll encounter a destroyer by morning." "And if we encounter a U-boat hunting group?" Fisher asked. "The fanatics who'd rather die than surrender?" "Then God help us all," Beck said. The vote was over. Our course was set. But the damage was done not just to the pipe, but to the crew. We'd fractured along invisible lines. 9 men wanted to live. 5 wanted to die with their honor intact. 4 wanted something else. Something in between. That evening, as we prepared to surface, I found Friedrich in the radio room. He was crying silently, his shoulders shaking. "What if we made the wrong choice?" he whispered. "What if honor did demand we fight to the end?" I put my arm around him. Honor is just a word men use to justify dying for nothing. We voted to live. Maybe that's the bravest thing we've ever done. Or the most cowardly. Maybe, I admitted. We'll have a lifetime to figure out which. At 2,200 hours, we surfaced. The boat broke through the waves with a groan, and the hatch opened to reveal a sky full of stars. More stars than I'd seen in months. Cold and distant and beautiful. Fresh air rushed in, pushing back the stench of our confinement. Men gasped and gulped it like drowning men finding shore. Some laughed. Some cried. Some just stood and breathed. Beck ordered minimal lighting, just enough to navigate. The diesels coughed to life, and we began our final journey. The white wake behind us glowed with phosphorescence, a trail pointing back to where we'd been, but not to where we were going. I stood on the conning tower next to Beck, the wind in my face, the ocean stretching endlessly in all directions. It was May 6th, 1945. Somewhere, the war was ending. Here, on U-957, we were already ghosts, caught between the world we'd left and the one we were sailing toward. Do you think they'll understand? I asked Beck. When we surrender, when we tell them we voted, do you think they'll understand? He didn't answer for a long time. Then, no, but maybe our children will, or their children. Someone, someday, will understand that choosing to live when death would be easier, that's the harder choice. We sailed on through the darkness. Behind us, the war we'd fought. Ahead, the judgment we'd face. And all around us, the ocean vast, cold, and utterly indifferent to human notions of honor or cowardice, duty or survival. Somewhere in the forward torpedo room, Richter wept in his restraints. Somewhere in the engine room, Muller nursed the wounded boat toward its final destination. Somewhere in the minds of 18 men, the same question echoed. Had we made the right choice? We wouldn't know the answer until we saw what waited for us in the morning light. Dawn came like an accusation. The sun rose over a glassy sea, painting the water gold and red, the colors of fire, the colors of blood. We'd been running on the surface for 8 hours, and every man aboard knew we were exposed, vulnerable, a sitting target for any Allied aircraft or warship that spotted us. But nothing came. The ocean remained empty, almost eerily so, as if the war had simply ended and forgotten to tell the sea. It's too quiet, Muller said, standing beside me on the conning tower. The chief engineer had dark circles under his eyes, so deep they looked like bruises. None of us had slept. Where are the patrols? The air cover? After 6 years of war, the Atlantic should be thick with hunters. Beck scanned the horizon with his binoculars. Maybe they've already won. Maybe they're not bothering to hunt anymore, just waiting for us to come to them. Or maybe they know, I suggested. Maybe they know the war is over, and they're letting the stragglers find their way home. Home. Friedrich laughed bitterly from his position at the AA gun. What's home? A crater? A mass grave? Before anyone could answer, the lookout shouted, "Contact, bearing 340, range approximately 12 kilometers. Single ship, merchant profile." Beck swung his binoculars around. I followed his gaze and saw it a freighter, traveling alone, no convoy, no escorts. A Liberty ship. From the profile, American. Silence on the conning tower. Every man thinking the same thing. "Battle stations," Beck said quietly. "Sir?" I stared at him. "We voted to surrender." "That ship is heading west," Beck interrupted. "Away from Britain. If we're going to surrender, we need to find a military vessel, not a merchant. And right now, that freighter is between us and where we need to go. We could surface," Muller suggested. "Signal our intentions. They might even have a radio we could use to contact. Or they might panic and call in airstrikes," Beck countered. "Or their crew might have guns and decide to be heroes." He lowered his binoculars. "We avoid contact, dive to periscope depth, and let them pass." But as we scrambled to dive stations, Fisher's voice came up from the control room. "Sir, The leak from yesterday is worse. At depth, we'll take on water faster than the pumps can handle. We dive. We might not come back up. Beck's jaw clenched. Then we stay on the surface. Helm, come to course 015. We'll circle around them. Contact, bearing 270. The lookout screamed. Aircraft, single engine, low and fast. I spun around and saw it a British Swordfish torpedo bomber, ancient and slow but deadly against surface submarines. It was already banking toward us, the sun glinting off its canopy. Dive! Dive! Beck roared, and the alarm klaxon split the air. Men poured down the hatch. I was the last one in, pulling the hatch shut behind me. As the vents opened and water flooded the ballast tanks, the deck tilted forward at a sharp angle, and I half fell, half slid down the ladder into the control room. Depth? Beck demanded. 15 meters and descending, Muller reported. But sir, the leak. I know. Take us to 30 and level off. The boat creaked and groaned, protesting every meter. Water sprayed from the damaged pipe in a high-pressure jet now, and 2 men were already working to patch it with rubber and clamps. Then the explosion. Not close, but not far either. The depth charge detonated perhaps 50 meters off our starboard side, and the shock wave slammed through the hull like a giant's fist. Lights shattered. Men were thrown against bulkheads. Glass gauges exploded, spraying shards. Another explosion. Closer this time. The boat rolled 30 degrees to port. Somewhere aft, metal screamed as something gave way. Damage report! Beck shouted over the chaos. Fire in the engine room, came the call. Electrical fire. Spreading. Seal the compartment. Use CO2. Another depth charge. This one was close enough that I felt it in my bones, felt the pressure wave compress my chest, squeeze my lungs. A pipe burst overhead, spraying hydraulic fluid. The lights went out completely, leaving us in absolute darkness except for the emergency torches. We have to surface, Muller yelled. The hull can't take much more. They'll machine gun us the moment we breach, Fisher countered. Then we die up there instead of down here, someone screamed. I couldn't tell who. Fear had made us all sound the same. Beck's voice cut through the panic. Emergency blow. Surface. All hands prepare to abandon ship. The compressed air roared into the ballast tanks, and U-957 shot toward the surface like a cork. We burst through the waves at a 45-degree angle, water cascading off the hull. The hatch flew open, and men scrambled up, abandoning their stations, climbing toward the light. I was in the conning tower when I saw the Swordfish coming around for another pass. The rear gunner had his weapon trained on us. Any second now, the bullets would start. White flag, Beck was shouting. Someone get me something white. Friedrich appeared, his white undershirt torn from his body. Beck tied it to a boat hook and waved it frantically overhead as the aircraft bore down on us. The Swordfish roared past, close enough that I could see the pilot's face. Young, like me. Scared, like me. His finger on the trigger, but not pulling. The aircraft circled once, twice, then waggled its wings and climbed away to the east. We'd been spared. The crew collapsed on the deck, gasping, weeping, laughing in that hysterical way men do when they've cheated death. Smoke poured from the aft hatch. The boat listed to starboard, clearly taking on water. Muller, Beck said quietly. Assessment. The chief engineer descended below, returned 5 minutes later with a face like stone. The fire's out, but we've lost the port diesel. The electrical system is destroyed. The leak has tripled. We have maybe 2 hours before she goes down. Beck nodded slowly, as if he'd expected nothing less. Then we have 2 hours to find someone to surrender to. He turned to me. Hartman, get the radio working. Any way you can. Drain the batteries dry if you have to, but send out a distress call. Tell them we're a German U-boat, requesting assistance. Tell them we surrender. I went below into the dying boat. The radio compartment was a disaster, smashed equipment, sparking wires, water sloshing around my ankles. But I was 19 years old and trained for this, and I was not going to die in the Atlantic without trying. I jury-rigged a transmitter from 3 broken sets, used the emergency battery, strung an antenna from the conning tower, and I sent out the call, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is German submarine U-957. Position 51 degrees north, 9 degrees west. We are sinking. We request assistance. We surrender. Repeat. We surrender. Static answered me. I kept sending. On deck, Beck assembled the crew. 18 men, soaked and shivering, smoke-stained and exhausted. Listen to me, he said. The boat is sinking. Help will come or it won't. But I need you to understand something. We tried to fight. We tried to follow orders. And the war repaid us with this a crippled boat and a choice between drowning and capture. Maybe we deserve to drown, Richter said. He'd been released from his restraints during the attack. Now he sat on the deck, his face blank, already a dead man. Maybe this is God's judgment. Maybe. Beck agreed. But I'm not ready to meet God yet. And I don't think he's ready for us either. He looked at each man. When the rescue comes, if it comes, remember this. We are submariners. We are sailors. Whatever crimes we committed as men, following orders. That doesn't excuse us, but it might explain us. You think they'll care? Fisher asked. The men whose ships we sank? The families we destroyed? You think they'll listen to explanations? No, Beck said honestly. But maybe history will. The sun climbed higher. The boat sank lower. I kept transmitting until the batteries died, until my fingers were numb on the key, until my voice was hoarse from speaking the same words over and over. We surrender. We surrender. We surrender. And then at 1,430 hours, Fisher spotted it. A destroyer, British by the profile, bearing down on us at flank speed. Here it comes, Friedrich whispered beside me. Judgment. The destroyer circled us twice, guns trained on our listing. Smoking hulk. Through the binoculars, I could see sailors lining the rails, staring at us, wondering if we were a threat, wondering if we were worth saving. Finally, a signal lamp flashed. Abandoned ship. Prepare to be taken aboard. Beck ordered the scuttling charges set. Whatever information remained in U-957 would go down with her. We were surrendering, but we weren't traitors. As the destroyer lowered boats, as British sailors rowed toward us, I looked around at my crewmates. Richter, staring at nothing. Muller, holding his wounded boat one last time. Fisher, young Hans, Friedrich, all of us ghosts in waiting. We made it, I said to Friedrich. We're going to live. He shook his head slowly. No, Klaus, we're going to survive. That's not the same thing as living. Living is what we'll have to figure out how to do next. The first British sailor climbed aboard our deck. He was older, maybe 40, with a weathered face and cold eyes. He looked at us with something between pity and disgust. Which one of you speaks English? He demanded. I do, Beck said, stepping forward. Kapitän Leutnant Werner Beck, commanding officer of U-957. I surrender my boat and my crew to your custody. The British sailor spat on our deck. You're monsters, he said simply. My brother died on a convoy ship you bastards torpedoed. I should let you drown. Beck didn't flinch. Then let us drown. God knows we might deserve it. But we voted to live, sailor. We chose to surrender rather than die for a lost cause. Maybe that counts for something. Maybe it doesn't. The British sailor studied Beck for a long moment. Then he turned and shouted to his crew. Get them on the boats! And search the sub before she goes down! As they herded us into the boats, I turned back for one last look at U-957. She was settling by the stern now, the scuttling charges doing their work. Soon she'd slip beneath the waves and join the dozens of other U-boats that had become graves in these waters. But we were alive. Against all odds, through all the madness and terror and moral compromise, we were alive. I didn't know if that was a blessing or a curse. I supposed I'd have the rest of my life to figure it out. They separated us immediately. Officers in one hold of HMS Resolute, enlisted men in another. The British sailors handled us roughly but not cruelly, professional soldiers doing an unpleasant job. They took our knives, our watches, our identity papers, everything that proved we'd been human before we became prisoners. I sat on the cold metal deck of the hold with Beck and Fisher, listening to the destroyer's engines throb beneath us. Above our heads, we could hear footsteps, voices, the sounds of a functioning warship, so different from our dying boat, so alive. "What happens now?" Fisher asked. He was shivering despite the blanket they'd given us. Beck stared at his hands. "Now we wait." Then, camps, interrogation, trials, probably. Once they figure out which of us to charge, then, he trailed off. Then we spend the rest of our lives being war criminals. I finished. "We are war criminals," Beck said quietly. 43 ships, Klaus. How many men? 1,000? More? We put torpedoes into vessels full of civilians, supplies, hope. We can call it following orders. We can say we were defending our country, but the dead don't care about our excuses. A British guard opened the hatch above us. "Beck, on your feet." They took him away. Fisher and I sat in silence, each alone with our thoughts. I wondered about my mother. Had she survived the bombing? Did she know where I was? Would she be ashamed of what I'd become? An hour later, they brought Beck back. His face was gray, his hands trembling. "What did they say?" I asked. He sat down heavily. "The war is over. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 7th yesterday. Hitler's dead. The Reich is finished. It's over, Klaus. Everything we fought for, everyone who died, it was all for nothing." "We knew that," Fisher said. "Knowing and hearing it confirmed are different things." Beck laughed, a broken sound. "The British commander asked me why we surrendered. I told him about the vote. He didn't believe me at first. Said he'd never heard of a U-boat crew voting on whether to continue fighting. I think he thought I was lying to make us seem more sympathetic." "Are we?" I asked. "Sympathetic?" Beck met my eyes. "Would you sympathize with us, Klaus? If you were them?" I thought about the men I'd never seen. The sailors who'd drowned because of coordinates I'd helped plot, because of orders I'd helped transmit. I thought about the children who'd grown up without fathers, the wives who'd become widows, all because boys like me had followed orders from a madman. "No," I said honestly. "I wouldn't." That night, they fed us the first decent meal in weeks. Bread, soup, coffee. It tasted like ashes in my mouth. But I ate anyway. Survival is a habit, hard to break. Through the bulkhead, we could hear the enlisted men. Someone was singing a German folk song my mother used to sing. One by one, other voices joined in, until 18 men were singing in the hold of a British destroyer, miles from a home that might not exist anymore. The British guards didn't stop us. Maybe they understood. Maybe they'd sung their own songs in dark places. When the singing stopped, Friedrich's voice came through the wall. "Klaus, are you there?" "I'm here." I called back. "I'm scared, Klaus. I'm so scared." "I know. Me too." "What if they hang us?" "Then we hang," I said. "At least we'll have confessed. At least we'll have told the truth. Does the truth matter anymore?" I didn't have an answer. 3 days later, we reached Portsmouth. They marched us off the destroyer in chains, 18 ghosts in tattered uniforms, squinting at the English sunshine. Crowds had gathered at the port. Civilians. Families. They screamed at us. Threw things. One woman rushed forward before the guards could stop her. "Murderers!" she shrieked. "My husband! You killed my husband!" Maybe we had. How would we know? 43 ships. How many husbands, fathers, sons? An officer pulled her back. We kept walking. our heads down, our chains clinking. They put us in a camp outside Southampton rows of Nissen huts, surrounded by barbed wire. Hundreds of other German prisoners were already there. Sailors, soldiers, airmen, men who'd fought until there was nothing left to fight for. We weren't the only U-boat crew to surrender. Over the next week, dozens more arrived. Some had fought to the last, been depth-charged into submission. Others had voted like us, choosing survival over honor. We recognized kindred spirits in their eyes, the shame, the relief, the confusion of men who'd outlived their cause. The British interrogators came next. Patient, thorough, relentless. They asked about our patrols, our kills, our orders. They asked who gave the orders to fire, who calculated the solutions, who loaded the torpedoes. I was the communications officer. I told my interrogator, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses. I relayed orders. I transmitted positions. So you were complicit, he said. Yes, I agreed. I was complicit. He seemed surprised by my honesty. Most prisoners deny everything, say they were just following orders. We were following orders, I said, but that doesn't make us innocent. I knew what we were doing. I knew men were dying. I did it anyway. He studied me for a long moment. How old are you? 19. Christ, he muttered. I stopped being a boy the first time I heard a ship sinking, I said. The first time I understood what that meant. The screaming, the darkness, the drowning. You don't get to be a boy after that. They kept us in the camp through that summer. The interrogations continued, but mostly we waited. Waited for trials that might not come, for sentences that might be death, for a future we couldn't imagine. In June, they showed us newsreels, footage from Bergen-Belsen, from Dachau, from Auschwitz, skeletal prisoners in striped uniforms, mountains of corpses, gas chambers disguised as showers. We sat in the screening room, hundreds of prisoners, and watched in silence as the evidence of our nation's greatest crime unfolded on the screen. Some men wept. Some vomited. Some sat with faces of stone, refusing to believe what their eyes showed them. Richter hanged himself that night, used his belt, tied it to a beam in the latrine. Someone found him at dawn, his face purple, his hands still clutching the leather. He left no note. He didn't need to. He made his choice, Beck said at the small funeral service the British allowed us. Maybe it was the honorable one after all. Or maybe he just couldn't live with what we'd done, Friedrich suggested. Is there a difference? I asked. We buried Richter in the prison cemetery, a small plot where they put POWs who died in captivity. The chaplain spoke in German, words about redemption and forgiveness that rang hollow in the summer air. 17 of us stood at attention as they lowered his coffin into English soil. One by one, we each dropped a handful of dirt onto the lid. When it was my turn, I found myself praying, not for Richter, but for all of us, for the men we'd killed, for the men we'd been, for the men we'd have to become if we wanted to outlive this shame. That autumn, they told us there would be no trials for most U-boat crews. Too many of us, and the international law was murky. Submarine warfare occupied a gray area legal but morally questionable. Unless we'd committed specific atrocities firing on lifeboats, machine-gunning survivors, we'd be held as regular POWs until repatriation could be arranged. We're getting away with it, Fisher said, disbelief in his voice. We're going to live. That's not getting away with it, Beck corrected. That's being sentenced to remember. For the rest of our lives, we'll remember. That's the punishment. He was right. They released us in stages over the next 2 years. First the young ones, then the older sailors, finally, the officers. I went home in March, 1947, almost 2 years after surrendering. Hamburg was ruins. My mother's building was gone, replaced by a crater full of rubble and rain. I found her through the Red Cross, living with relatives in the countryside, aged 10 years in the 6 I'd been gone. She held me when we reunited, and I wept in her arms like a child. "I thought you were dead," she whispered. When the list came, when they said, "Your U-boat had been lost." "I should have been," I said. "We should all have been. We voted to live instead." "Then you made the right choice," she insisted. "Whatever you did, whatever happened out there, you made the right choice." I wanted to believe her. I tried to find work, but who wanted to hire a U-boat sailor? We were pariahs, reminders of a war everyone wanted to forget. I worked in construction, rebuilding the cities we'd helped destroy. Brick by brick, trying to atone. Friedrich survived too. I saw him in Hamburg in 1949, working as a teacher. He'd married a girl from his hometown, had a daughter. He looked happy. Or as close to happy as men like us could get. "Do you think about it?" I asked him over coffee. "The boat? The war?" "Every day," he said. "Every single day. But I think about my daughter more. She's 3 now. She doesn't know what her father did. Some days she'll ask, and I'll have to tell her. I'll have to explain how I voted to put torpedoes into ships, how I helped kill strangers I never met." "What will you tell her?" "The truth," he said. "That I was young and stupid and thought I was being a hero. That I learned too late what heroism actually means. And that I chose to live so I could spend the rest of my life trying to be better." "Is it working?" I asked. "Being better?" He smiled sadly. "Ask me in another 40 years. I never saw Beck again. I heard he moved to Argentina, changed his name, tried to disappear into anonymity. Some men couldn't live with what they'd done. They needed to become someone else entirely." Muller died of a heart attack in 1953. Hans Becker became a priest. Fischer drank himself to death by 1960. One by one, the crew of U-957 scattered across the world, carrying our shared guilt like shrapnel embedded too deep to remove. As for me, I'm 73 now, writing this in the year 1999. The Berlin Wall has fallen. Germany is reunited. The world has moved on from the war that defined my youth. But I never moved on. I still dream about the Atlantic, about the sounds of ships sinking, about the vote that saved my life and cursed my conscience. I dream about Richter hanging in the latrine, about the woman in Portsmouth screaming about her murdered husband, about the torpedo solutions I calculated with such precision. I am, according to